Good morning. I'm going to read through my Bible. They don't have the translation that I use on screen, so it's going to be a little bit different. But if you're reading yours, anyways, no two seem to be about the same, word for word. But so I'll apologize for them right up front. All right, Hebrews 1. Long ago, God spoke many times and in many ways to our ancestors through the prophets. But now in these final days, he has spoken to us through his Son. God promised everything to the Son as an inheritance. And through the Son, he made the universe and everything in it. The Son reflects God's own glory, and everything about him represents God exactly. He sustains the universe by the mighty power of his command. After he died to cleanse the world and cleanse us from the stain of sin, he sat down in the place of honor at the right hand of the majestic God of heaven. This shows that God's Son is far greater than the angels, just as the name God gave him in, is far greater than their names. For God never said to the angels what he said to Jesus. You are my son. Today I have become your father. And again, God said, I will be his father, and he will be my son. And then, when he presented his honored son to the world, God said, let all the angels of God worship him. God calls his angels messengers swift as the wind, and servants made of flaming fire. But to his Son he says, your throne, O God, endures forever and ever. Your royal power is expressed in righteousness. Your love, you love what is right and you hate what is wrong. Therefore, God, your God, has anointed you, pouring out the oil of joy on you more than on anyone else. And, Lord, in the beginning you laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. Ever they will perish, even they will perish, but you will remain forever. You will wear out, they will wear out like an old coat. They will fade away like old clothing, but you are always the same. You will never grow old. And God never said to an angel, as he did to his son, sit in honor at my right hand until I humble your enemies, making them a footstool under your feet. But the angels are only servants. They are the spirits sent from God to care for those who will receive salvation.
Amen. Thanks, Bob. Lord, it's such a gift to have the various translations that we have. Thank you for the scholars and the minds and the people that have diligently translated and sought to understand and bring understanding to your people. And so we pray for the world and the church around the world where they don't have these opportunities. We pray that we would use all that we've been entrusted with, all that you've given us to steward, that we would steward it well for your kingdom's glory, not our own. Amen. All right, kids, if you would like to head on out this way, we've got some things planned for you back there. And so, Lord, we thank you for Molly and Wyatt and Duncan and Ollie and Oliver and Finn, Elsie and Willa and another Finn and Judah and Truett, Ava and Lily. Lord, we just are so thankful for these kids. Pray that they would continue to grow up and become more and more like you each and every day. And we pray that we too would do that all as your children. Amen. Anybody ever operated a press or like stamped anything? Anybody, like maybe Christmas card time, you get the little rubber stampers and you like do that thing? Or okay, so and Adam isn't here today, and I maybe should have gotten some examples from him, but whatever. Maybe you've seen Adam Beckerman, who roams around here. So he's got this leather working business, and he was showing me some things that he does. He takes these big press, and he's making these coasters, and so he cuts out the design. He gets this nice supple material, this nice leather, and then he takes a stamp, and then he puts this big long lever, and he stamps it down in there. So much, if you've used pressure or anything to kind of stamp something, you see that what is on the bottom side of that stamp, and you press that in there, and under pressure, and due to the malleable or formable nature of the material that's being stamped, all of a sudden you get this image, right? It's the exact imprint of that image that has been stamped down upon. Hold that in your mind. We're going to come back to that and see how important that is. First, I want to give some background to Hebrews, and we'll continue to come back to this, but I just want to just for us to kind of get a few visuals in our mind. So the book of Hebrews was written after the resurrection of Christ, and there's various debates about whether it was before or after the fall of the temple, and various debates about who wrote it. So some people, and so if you're one that's like, I need to have all the details, I need to understand all the various nuances of a book, buckle up. Because what's great, and I think what's great about Hebrews is that it says like, hey, look, you're not going to know all the details, but what you do need to know is that Jesus is greater. And just in that alone, and just kind of that foundation, we see even like kind of advice for life, right? Where it's like, hey, you're not going to understand everything that's going on. You're not going to know for certain what is going to happen around the corner. There may not be explanations as to why. There might not be certainty about all things that we wish that we do. Or even when we look at other letters, we're like, well, this person wrote this. How do you know? Well, they say so. And they sign their name at the end. And there's historical events in there, so we know exactly what's going on. And Hebrews is like, I'm going to give you some hints. But the author remains anonymous. There's no date. We just know that it's written to seemingly to some Jewish Christians in Rome. And the message is Jesus is greater. And so just a few things to be thinking about to kind of get us in the place of who would be receiving this letter. So I've got an image. This is just off of Google Maps. So a couple key cities to keep in mind. So we've got Alexandria down there in the bottom where the red dot is. There's a really big library in Alexandria. If you've ever heard of a book called the Septuagint, or some of the translators, that was there, and so they're trying to amass this great library. So like all that could be known, right, and could be collected and learned. And so that's in Alexandria. Now, as you could see, if you're going to walk this whole path, it would take a long time. And so then Jerusalem is right over there. So that's so John was coming out of Jerusalem, and then he kind of goes up to Turkey, and that's where he's pastoring, and that's where the letter that we just looked at for the last year, that's where that was written. And then if you're going to kind of keep going and then go all the way over to the city of Rome, that's where the gospel is going. That's where the gospel has gone. And so at the end of the Gospels, when we get this, go out and declare, the gospel has gone. Has anybody ever been I've never been to any of these cities. Has anyone ever been to Jerusalem? Or anybody ever seen pictures of Jerusalem or heard anything about Jerusalem? Or been to Rome or heard anything about Rome? Or been to Alexandria or Egypt or know things about that? Are those three places similar? No, they're all very, very different. They were very different then, they're very different now. And so what happened is, so then there had been Jews that had been living in and around Jerusalem and Israel that had been kind of scattered throughout the ancient Near East, throughout the Mediterranean world. And so there were some who were living in Rome. And they came to believe in Jesus. And now, if you were, and we talked, remember, we had the big blue curtain or the big blue sheet. And so, are there differences between if you grew up Jewish and if you grew up Roman? Are there some nuanced, slight differences, or are they fairly large? Fairly large, fairly different people, right? And now, if you were and if you were to become a Christian, and if you had grown up Jewish and you became a Christian, would that change your interaction with your friends and your family and your social life and kind of how you worshiped a little bit or a lot of it? A lot of it. A lot of things would be changing for you. And so imagine, the author of Hebrews is writing a letter to a group of people who are kind of displaced from their homeland, who are surrounded by, that don't really fit in. They're kind of in this culture, and it's different, right? And so they don't really fit in with the Jews anymore. They're the friends and family they've known because they're following Christ. And so they don't quite fit in there, and they don't really fit in with kind of Hellenized and in the very Roman world. They don't really fit in there either. And so could you imagine a people, or could you kind of experience or know what it would be like to grow up with an understanding about who God was that then had categorically shifted greatly? And what would it be like to grow up in a world that had a political system and a kind of a social structure that was one way, and then as you kind of came into maturation, changed a lot? If you grew up in from the 70s on, this should especially be tracking with you. And if you have been experiencing any of the world's events in the last 100 years, this should be, in the West, this should be tracking with you. This is a letter that we as Westerners can really identify with, because so much of the world is changing, and yet underneath it, undergirding it all, is, despite everything, Jesus has been, is now, and will forever be greater. And so these people are experiencing a great deal of suffering. We're not really sure, since we don't know exact dates as to when this was, we're not really sure who exactly was in charge of Rome when this letter was written. There was a guy named Nero. Anybody ever heard of Nero? He's kind of good leader or kind of crazy. A lot of crazy, right? And so what he liked to do is he liked to have dinner parties. And he didn't use cafe lights to light them up. He just lit people on fire. Not awesome. He really liked to light Christians on fire. So now, if you could imagine being a Jewish Christian living in Rome, already feeling slightly displaced, would you have some concerns, and would you have some things where you're just kind of like, ooh, I don't know about this? If you were waffling, would it be easy to kind of say, I think I might start exiting stage left? And the author of Hebrews is going to go, yeah, I get that. I understand that there is hurt. I understand that there is confusion. I understand even that you are suffering, and that you know people that are suffering for the cause of Christ. I know that you know people that things are coming unraveled because of what you believe, what you stand up for, how you have changed. I know that. I want you to know that this isn't predicated, you're not able to do this because of a newly rearranged and kind of redone program. But that you're doing this because of Christ. You're doing this because of the abiding love of God, that the Lord dwells within you richly, as Kelly read earlier. So there's going to be some acknowledgement of that. They're going to say, be strong, endure, continue to do the things that have brought you here, continue meeting together, continue encouraging one another, stay with Christ, because he is greater. Let's not believe my words. Let's look at some scripture. So that's kind of that's the context. That's sort of a little of what's going on. We'll continue to look at this. But let's look at the text. Long ago, at many times and in many ways, God spoke. Love that. So if you were in Rome, and so these Jewish Christians, they're living in Rome. They're going out and they're talking with their neighbors. They're rubbing shoulders with people that do not have an understanding of who God the Father is. They have this understanding of lots of gods, and so the author of Hebrews right here is saying, look, this is a God that is speaking to you. It says God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. It says, hey, look, there are these people. They were prophets. God spoke to them, and they've given us these words. But in these last days, He has spoken to us by His Son, who He appointed heir over all things. So whenever we see a but, I love those transition moments in Scripture. It's like, hey, here's this way. This is kind of this framework in which we've maybe seen or experienced God for quite some time. God was speaking to the prophets, and the prophets, they told us some things. Not an entire picture, not totally clear, but it was really great that God was speaking to us still. And the author of Hebrews says, but recently, over the last few years, in recent history, in a time that we who are here have experienced, He's spoken to us through His Son. So if you say, this is new, there's a shift that's happening. He appointed heir over all things, through whom also He created the world. He is the radiance of the glory of God, the exact imprint of His nature. He's different than the prophets. The prophets were ones that listened and spoke. Jesus is the exact imprint of His nature, the radiance of His glory. And so you're saying, like, prophets, great. Like, even now, we read through the prophets, you're like, yeah, cool. Jesus, greater. Yeah? Okay. So He's the exact imprint of His nature and upholds the universe by the word of His power. What's God like? What's God like? If you're not sure, you're in good company. Millions of people for thousands of years have wrestled with this question of what is God like? The author of Hebrews goes, God's like Jesus. He's always been like Jesus. Anything that you see Jesus do, that's what God does. Because Jesus is the exact imprint of God's nature. They are one in the same. And so when we read stories about Jesus healing the sick, it's because God heals the sick. When we see Jesus going to the marginalized, it's because God goes to the marginalized. When we see Jesus that is going out and proclaiming the good news to all who are held captive, it's because that's how God the Father operates. So everything that we need to know about God is shown to us in and by the Son. It says God the Father's the exact imprint of His nature is Jesus. He upholds the universe by the word of His power. So He's created and He sustains. So if you were in the ancient Near East and you're wondering and you wrestle with those questions of origin, meaning, morality, and destiny, and you're going, okay, well, how did we come here? Why are we here? What's happening? How is everything not just completely spinning off the rails? The author of Hebrews says Jesus is holding it all together. The one who's created the world is continued to hold it all together, to not just create and leave, but created and stayed and sustains. Upholds the universe by the word of His power, and this is one of my favorite lines. after making purification for sins. Pretty straightforward. So after he makes purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high. In some ways, this just describes, like a day at work. You come home, after he got home from work, walked in, he sat down on his lazy boy. Could this, in some ways, can we kind of see this? Okay. After making purification for sins, what does purification for sins entail in the Jewish world? Death, sacrifice. How often? Like daily and weekly and monthly and yearly, right? There's this continual sacrifice, continual purification. So it would be ongoing. So I'm not a great English student, but I think after making purification means that purification is done. It's over. That system that we used to have to go through where it was constantly repeating, that's all over with now. He's saying Jesus has made purification for sin once and for all. The fullness of your purification is here. The finality of purification is here in Christ. And so after making the full and final purification for sin, he sits down at the right hand of God the Father. So the reunification with God the Father as a result of the full and final purification for sins. Having become as much superior to the angels as the name as he inherited is more excellent than theirs. Angels were, we'll get into this more next week, just kind of a little preview. Angels were messengers and if you grew up in a Jewish worldview, the angels were ones that would bring these messages. And we kind of bring good news. If you're familiar with various Christmas stories, that's fairly common, right? We know this. We've maybe heard of this. So the author of Hebrews is saying, all the good news that you've ever heard, Jesus is better than any of those messages and all of those messengers. Because all those showed a purification that needed to be continued over and over and over again, and that is now done. And so we're living in a new reality. That was then, but in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son. And that changes everything. This is, we're now living in a new reality. We're living in a new paradigm. Where we're not made right by whether we're Roman or Hellenistic or Greek. We're made finally and fully pure by the blood of Christ, the heir of God the Father, of the Son of whom created all that is seen and unseen, the exact imprint of the nature of God. And so as the author of Hebrews is going to continue to just bring us back to wherever there are questions, wherever there's uncertainty, wherever there is kind of a blank where we don't know, he's going to remind us that that is not primarily what is important. That Jesus is greater is what is important. And that everything flows from this. And so we're going to even look, and the author of Hebrews is going to take the next few lines and the next few chapters, just continuing to set up and say, all that we think is great, Jesus is greater than that, and out of that flows everything. And then once we get into chapters 11, 12, and 13, this kind of goes like a sermon, so he's going to tell a lot about his main point, and then in the last few chapters, is going to talk about what we do as a result of that. But it's all predicated on whatever we're doing. And so if we reverse engineer it, whatever we do needs to be predicated on, girded by, informed through that Jesus is greater. That God is great. That he is in control. And so what we see here is he's saying that Jesus is greater. That the fulfillment of Genesis 1, 26 and 20 through 28, that, go for, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. That what the earthly son of the first, that what Adam couldn't do, Jesus does. What earth cannot give you, heaven does. And so we see more clearly who God is, and this begins to end that duality that some of us have, where we think like, oh yeah, there's like God the Father is mean God. Jesus is relatable God. And it's just wildly unhelpful. And so this begins to dovetail and bring our notion of who God is together, that we begin to see both his justice and his mercy wrapped up in the same. Allows us to begin to say that we receive and we reflect Christ, because just as Christ is the exact imprint of God's nature, so as we become malleable, the Spirit continues to form us and to press us and to help us to become the imprint of Christ, that we too would receive and reflect the glory of God, that we too would be the exact imprint of his nature, that when the outside world would look in, they would see the image of God reflected in us as individuals and as a group. And just as we think about, as we coming back to that analogy of the press, it's always helpful when you start with very malleable material, right? Like, is it easier to form clay or form steel? Clay, it's nice and malleable, it's squishy. And with steel, you had to use a lot of heat, bigger hammers. And so, how do we become? The Spirit continues to soften us, continues to make us malleable, formable, that we too would reflect the image of God. And this continues to get at our heart. Because primarily we're looking, and one of the things of the people that are receiving this letter, they're wrestling with control. They're not really sure what to do with suffering. Things aren't really going well in their world. They're not really sure how to react to it. And some of the ways that this when if you've ever, felt like life isn't really in control, we kind of become impatient, overbearing. Might try to, always seek to have the last word, need to be right, kind of always having to justify ourselves. And the author of Hebrews is going to just invite the people to say, no, more trust in Jesus. And as we begin to see that Jesus is greater, this gets at the root and is the antidote of our narcissism. And so as a result, what can we do today? One, if you're looking for very practical steps, if you're like, let's give me something to do, check out 11, 12, and 13. There's a whole list of little things that the author of Hebrews is going to just point out and say, hey, do this, do this, do this, do this. And we'll get into it further, but if you're interested in something that way, go ahead and check that out. But overarching all that, continue to see Jesus as greater. So you go out to look at, how is Jesus greater? And when we consider the circumstances of life, how is Jesus greater? How is Jesus showing himself as greater? And what does it look like to believe that Jesus is greater? That is awesome as I love gingerbread cookies. Yesterday was a great day in my world. Jesus is greater than that. Megan and I got to just hang out and spend some time because we kind of did like the drive up and back thing. And so my parents were like, yeah, we'll take Fran. That'll be cool. So I got to spend time with Megan. That was really fun. We got to just talk and just hang out. Like this morning, was like woke up and ate breakfast. And I love Fran. Fran, if you're watching, I love you. But man, it's great to have some time with Megan. And Jesus is greater than that. And it's fun to be here with all of you. And to have people that are going, yeah, I want to see the kingdom. No, I want to see this manifested in the Brainerd Lakes area and around the world. And Jesus is greater than that. Because these are all things that flow out of the goodness of God and point back to his goodness and his glory. And the fact that I don't need to control and manipulate my life in such a way that is in my image, but rather that I receive and reflect God's. And so how do we see that in our own lives? And how do we begin to make that come to fruition as a group, as a community and how that begins to reflect the world around us. How do we begin to surrender control? How do we begin to let go of our timeline? How do we begin to listen to the Lord and to respond to what he's doing? So as we're gathering together and conversing, just maybe spend some time thinking about the book of Hebrews. Not a book that it's a tough one. What's been your experience with it? And what stands out? And as you begin to think about some of the historical nuances, what stands out maybe that didn't before? How are you beginning to track maybe a little bit with the world that the book is written to? Are there certain things about that cultural experience that stick out to you? How is it similar to our own world? How is it different? And where are you wrestling with control in your life? Where are we, perhaps overbearing, demanding, inflexible, impatient, seeking the last word? What does it look like to put 100% trust in Jesus? So when we hear God's voice, we remember, we remind, and we rejoice. Let's remember that Jesus is greater. Let's remember that he is ultimately in control, that he is forming and shaping us to be the imprint of his nature, that he's good, that he's with us in the midst of suffering. Let's remind others of this. Let's remind others that Jesus is in control. And let's rejoice that we don't need to justify our sin. We don't need to justify how we live our lives, because Jesus has done that. Jesus is the full and final purification for our sin. And so no longer do we have to compensate through pride and ego or fall victim to insecurity, because Jesus has done it. It's over. We live in a new era. Everything about the old way is gone. The new way is here. Jesus is Lord of that way. And he is greater and invites you to follow along.